Something is quietly happening to millions of Americans. It is not just stress. It is not just inflation. It is not just people being tired. It is the slow collapse of hope. And the most dangerous part is that it does not always look like collapse from the outside. You still go to work. You still answer messages. You still buy groceries. You still smile when someone asks how you are. You still say, "I'm fine," because explaining the truth would take too much energy. But inside, something has changed. You are not just worried about today. You are starting to wonder if tomorrow is even worth planning for. By the end of this video, you will understand why millions of Americans are losing hope, and why the real reason is not what most people think. It is not because people stopped trying. It is because trying stopped working. For decades, the promise was simple: work hard, stay responsible, pay your bills, build a life. Maybe it would not be easy, maybe it would take years, but the direction was supposed to make sense. Now, for millions of people, that direction feels broken. You can work full-time and still feel poor. You can get a raise and still feel behind. You can do everything right and still feel like one emergency could knock your life sideways. The Federal Reserve reported that 73% of adults said they were doing okay financially or living comfortably. That sounds stable until you hear the next number. Only 63% said they could cover a $400 emergency with cash or something equivalent. That means a car repair, a dental bill, a broken refrigerator, a medical copay, or one missed paycheck can become a crisis for tens of millions of people. This is where hope begins to crack. Not when life becomes impossible, but when life becomes too close to impossible. Picture someone awake at 2:13 inches the morning. The bedroom is dark. The phone is face down. Nothing dramatic is happening. But the person is staring at the ceiling, doing math in their head. Rent, gas, groceries, insurance, credit card minimums, medication, the electric bill, maybe a child's school expense, maybe an older parent who needs help. They are not dreaming about the future. They are trying to survive the next 30 days. That is not peace. That is not stability. That is a life with no margin. And margin is the hidden thing hope depends on. When you have margin, an unexpected bill is annoying. When you have no margin, an unexpected bill feels like a threat. When you have margin, tomorrow can feel open. When you have no margin, tomorrow feels like another test you might fail. This is why millions of Americans are not just financially stressed. They are psychologically trapped. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that average annual household spending reached more than $78,000 in 2024. Housing and transportation alone took up about half of that spending. Think about what that means. Before a family saves for retirement, before they take a trip, before they fix their teeth, before they replace a broken appliance, before they buy their child new shoes, half the budget is already going to the cost of living somewhere and getting to work. Housing is not a luxury. Transportation is not a luxury. They are the price of participating in society. So when those two costs eat the center of the budget, everything else becomes a negotiation. You see it in the grocery store. A person stands in front of the meat section after work. They are not buying anything fancy. They are not making a luxury decision. They are choosing between the package they want and the package they can justify. They look at the total in their cart. They look back at the shelf. Then they put something back. That small movement is not small. Multiply it by millions. Millions of people putting things back. Millions delaying repairs. Millions canceling plans. Millions saying, maybe next month. USDA data shows food prices kept rising in 2024 and 2025, slower than the worst inflation years, but still rising. And that matters because people do not experience inflation as a chart. They experience it as the moment the same bag of groceries costs more than it did last year, even though there is less inside. This is the first layer of the crisis. The math of ordinary life stopped feeling ordinary. But that is only the first layer, because when money has no margin, time loses margin too. Microsoft's Work Trend Index described what it called the infinite workday. The average employee sends or receives more than 50 messages outside core business hours. By 10 p.m., nearly a third of active workers are back in email. Think about that. A person finishes work, commutes home, eats something fast, handles the house, checks on the kids, pays a bill, maybe calls a parent, maybe folds laundry, and then the phone lights up again. One message, then another. Not always urgent, but urgent enough to steal the rest. This is why rest does not feel like rest anymore. The body leaves work. The nervous system does not. You sit on the couch, but your mind is still employed. You try to watch a show, but part of you is waiting for another notification. You lie in bed, but your brain is already rehearsing tomorrow. This is not normal tiredness. Normal tiredness ends when the day ends. Modern exhaustion follows you into the night. And once work enters every quiet space, recovery starts disappearing. That is the mechanism most people miss. You do not burn out only because you work too many hours. You burn out because no hour feels fully yours. A lunch break becomes a message window. A weekend becomes a catch-up zone. A bedroom becomes a second office. A family dinner becomes a pause between alerts. The problem is not that people forgot how to rest. The problem is that rest has been invaded. And once rest disappears, hope starts to weaken. Because hope requires energy. You need energy to imagine a future. You need energy to apply for a better job. You need energy to make plans. You need energy to call a friend. You need energy to believe life can change. When every day drains you and every night fails to restore you, your world gets smaller. Then the crisis moves into the body. KFF found that about 36% of adults skipped or postponed needed healthcare in the past year because of cost. About 43% said they did not take medication as prescribed because of cost in the past year. That is not just a healthcare statistic. That is fear turning into a daily routine. Picture someone opening a medical bill at the kitchen table. They read the first line, then the second. Then they fold it back into the envelope and push it away. Not because they do not care, because they cannot afford to care all at once. Or picture someone who feels a symptom but waits. They search online. They tell themselves it is probably nothing. They decide to see if it goes away. That is what expensive healthcare does to the mind. It turns the body into a financial risk. When going to the doctor might create debt, people start negotiating with pain. They wait. They minimize. They postpone. They gamble with their own health. Not because they are reckless, but because the system has made care feel dangerous. This is where stress becomes long-term fear. If you know a sickness can become a bill, and a bill can become debt, and debt can become collections, and collections can damage your credit, then every symptom carries more than medical meaning. It carries economic danger. That is why so many people are not simply anxious. They are bracing. There is a difference. Anxiety says, something might go wrong. Bracing says, something always goes wrong, and I have to be ready. A person can live in that state for a while, but not forever. Eventually, it shows up as insomnia, headaches, irritability, emotional numbness, short patience, a constant feeling that you are behind, even when you are standing still. Gallup reported that only 29% of U.S. adults described their mental health as excellent, the first reading below 30% in its trend. That number is not just about therapy or mood. It is about a country where millions of people are functioning without feeling well. They are not collapsing. They are continuing. And sometimes continuing is exactly what hides the damage. This is where the crisis spreads from the individual into the home. A parent comes home after a long day and sits in the car before going inside. Not because they do not love their family, because they need 2 quiet minutes before becoming needed again. Inside, dinner is waiting. Children need attention. A partner needs help. Laundry is unfinished. A bill is due. A message from work is still unanswered. So the parent walks in carrying a bag of groceries and a face that says, "I'm okay." But they are not okay. They are overloaded. The Federal Reserve found that 1 in 4 parents with children under 13 used paid childcare, and most families who paid for both childcare and housing spent at least half as much on childcare as they did on housing. Think about that. For many families, childcare is not a side expense. It is almost another rent. This is why parents are exhausted in a way that is hard to explain. They are not only raising children, they are paying to keep working to afford care, and then coming home too tired to enjoy the life they are working to support. That is a brutal loop, and it creates a particular kind of guilt. You work for your family, but work takes you from your family. You pay for stability, but stability keeps moving. You want to be present, but survival keeps interrupting presence. This is why some family dinners are silent. Not because people have nothing to say, because everyone has already spent the day surviving something. And the damage does not stop with parents. It reaches younger adults before they even begin. The Federal Reserve reported that 49% of adults under 30 lived with a parent in 2025, up sharply from before the pandemic. It also found that 47% of adults, ages 18 to 29, received help from someone outside their household to pay an expense in the prior year. That is not just a lifestyle choice, that is a signal. A young person sits at a laptop looking at rent listings. 1 bedroom, nothing extravagant, just a place to live. The number on the screen is larger than what their paycheck can handle, so they close the laptop. They do not give up loudly. They just postpone adulthood one more time. And postponement becomes a pattern. Move out later, marry later, have children later, buy a home later, start saving later, believe later. But later is not a life plan. Later is what people say when the present will not let them move. The National Association of Realtors reported that the first-time homebuyer share fell to a historic low of 21%, and the median age of a first-time buyer rose to 40. That number should stop people. 40. For many Americans, buying a first home is no longer the early chapter of adulthood. It is becoming something that arrives late, if it arrives at all. And if homeownership moves out of reach, more than housing changes. People stop picturing roots. They stop picturing a backyard. They stop picturing a room for a baby. They stop picturing themselves as owners of the future. Pew found that among adults under 50 who are unlikely to have children, 36% say a major reason is that they cannot afford to have a child, and 38% cite concerns about the state of the world. That is one of the clearest signs of a hope crisis. People are not just cutting vacations, they are cutting life milestones. They are not just saying, "I cannot afford this month." They are saying, "I cannot afford the future I was supposed to want." And here is the part almost nobody talks about. When people stop forming families, stop buying homes, stop saving, stop trusting institutions, stop believing effort leads to stability, the crisis is no longer private. It becomes social. A society cannot stay healthy if millions of people feel the future has been priced out. The middle-aged feel it differently. They may not be looking at a first apartment. They may already have a mortgage, kids, aging parents, and a job they cannot afford to lose. This group often looks stable from the outside. They have a house. They have a car. They have a LinkedIn profile. They have responsibilities. But stability with no margin is not security. It is a performance. Imagine someone in their late 40s sitting in a parked car outside work. They want to quit. They know the job is draining them. They know the stress is changing who they are at home. But they cannot leave because the mortgage is due, the health insurance is tied to the job, and one career mistake could damage everyone who depends on them. So they go inside. Again, not because they are hopeful, because they are trapped by responsibility. This is one of the sharpest forms of modern despair. You do not stay because you believe. You stay because leaving is too risky. Debt makes that trap tighter. New York Fed data showed total household debt reached nearly $18.8 trillion by the end of 2025, with credit card balances at about $1.28 trillion and auto loans around $1.66 trillion. Debt changes the emotional meaning of work. You are no longer only working for your future. You are working to keep the past from catching you. Last month's emergency, last year's medical bill, the car repair, the credit card balance. The loan you took because there was no other way. Debt turns time backward. Your paycheck arrives, and part of it is already gone to problems you already survived. That is why hope fades. Because hope needs the feeling that tomorrow belongs to you. Debt makes tomorrow feel already claimed. And then there are older Americans. Many spent decades believing work would eventually lead to rest. But the Federal Reserve reported that only 35% of non-retirees said their retirement saving was on track. That means a huge share of people are approaching later life without confidence that they can stop. Picture someone in their early 60s looking at a retirement account late at night. They do not need luxury. They just want to know if they can afford to be old. That question should not feel terrifying. But for many people, it does. And when older workers cannot retire, younger workers feel the pressure too. Promotions slow. Families depend on multiple generations. Adult children need help. Parents need help. Everyone is helping everyone, but no one feels secure. This is not a failure of one age group. It is a chain reaction. Young adults cannot launch. Parents cannot breathe. Middle-aged workers cannot risk change. Older adults cannot rest. Full-time workers cannot always get ahead, and everyone is told to treat it like a personal problem. That is the lie at the center of the crisis. Personal discipline matters, but personal discipline cannot repair a broken equation. You can budget carefully and still lose to rent. You can meal prep and still lose to medical bills. You can work hard and still lose to childcare. You can save money and still lose to one emergency. You can be responsible and still feel afraid. The problem is not that people forgot how to try. The problem is that trying now comes with fewer guarantees. APNORC reported that only about a third of Americans believe the American dream still exists. Half say it once held true, but no longer does. That is not just pessimism. That is a national warning light. The American dream was never only about money. It was a psychological contract. It told people their sacrifices had a destination. It told them long hours had a purpose. It told them responsible choices would become a better life. When that contract breaks, people do not immediately stop moving. They keep working. They keep paying. They keep smiling, but their effort loses meaning. Work becomes survival. Saving becomes defense. Rest becomes guilt. Health becomes a gamble. Family becomes pressure. The future becomes something you avoid thinking about. This is the real reason millions of Americans are losing hope, not because they are weak, not because they are ungrateful, not because they want life to be easy. They are losing hope because the life they were told to build has become mathematically, physically, and emotionally harder to sustain. And the cruelest part is that many still blame themselves. They say, maybe I should be better with money. Maybe, but millions of people did not suddenly become bad at math. The math changed. They say, maybe I should work harder. Maybe. But millions of people did not suddenly become lazy. The reward for work changed. They say, maybe I should be more positive. Maybe, but positivity does not pay a deductible. Positivity does not lower rent. Positivity does not answer a 10 p.m. email. Positivity does not make childcare affordable. Positivity does not erase debt. You cannot mindset your way out of a collapsing margin. That is the sentence people feel but are afraid to say. You cannot mindset your way out of a collapsing margin. Hope does not disappear because people stop dreaming. Hope disappears when reality punishes the dream too many times. A young adult stops checking home prices. A parent stops imagining a calmer year. A worker stops applying for better jobs. A couple stops talking about children. An older adult stops counting down to retirement. A patient stops scheduling care. A friend stops answering messages. Not all at once. Quietly. Practically. One postponed decision at a time. That is how a society loses hope without an official announcement. No alarm sounds. No headline captures it fully. People just get smaller. Their plans get smaller. Their conversations get smaller. Their dreams get smaller. And then the culture wonders why everyone seems angry, lonely, tired, distracted, and afraid. But by the end, the question is no longer why people are exhausted. The question is how they carried this much for so long. If this feels close to your life, you are not imagining it. You are not broken because you are overwhelmed. You are not failing because the old advice stopped matching the new reality. You are not weak because rest does not fix a life that keeps demanding more than a human being can give. The first step is not pretending everything is fine. The first step is naming what is real. Something has shifted. Millions feel it. And silence is part of how the crisis survives. So maybe the small action today is not to fix your entire life. Maybe it is to tell the truth about one part of it. The bill you are afraid to open. The job you cannot afford to leave. The doctor visit you keep delaying. The child you are not sure you can afford. The house you stopped imagining. The retirement you are scared may never come. The loneliness you keep hiding because everyone else seems busy too. When people speak honestly about the pressure they are carrying, the story changes. It stops being, why can't people handle life? And becomes, why has life become so hard for so many people to handle? That is the question America has to face. Not, why are people losing hope, but what has made hope feel so expensive? So, I want to ask you something specific. Which part of this feels closest to your life right now? Is it the bills? The sleep? The job you cannot leave? The healthcare you keep delaying? The family pressure? The fear that the future you worked for is moving farther away? Write it in the comments. Not because one comment fixes the crisis, but because millions of people are carrying the same weight and thinking they are carrying it alone. You are not alone. And maybe that is where hope begins again. Not with pretending the system is fine, but with finally telling the truth about what it is doing to people.